Welcome to Transqat. I'm Claire McCarthy. Josh Lambert, welcome to Transqat. I'm going to start with a quote from Rudine Sims Bishop. It's big in school library circles. She says, "Books are sometimes windows, offering views of worlds that may be real or imagined, familiar or strange, and these windows are also sliding glass doors, and readers have only to walk through in imagination to become part of whatever world has been created or recreated by the author. When lighting conditions are just right, however, a window can also be a mirror. Literature transforms human experience and reflects it back to us, and in that reflection, we can see our own lives and experiences as part of a larger human experience. Reading, then, becomes a means of self-affirmation, and readers often seek their mirrors in books."
Yeah, Claire, that is a really lovely quote to kick us off, and it's a great segue into why we do what we do. And I think just as a response to that quote directly, I mean, although a person might not be able to travel to Mars or to get a ride on the magic school bus, there are themes and experiences and emotions that those characters, that readers have to really identify with, that ultimately help people process their day-to-day and in the real world, or in reality, if you will, that's probably more detached than some of the fantasy novels that we have come to know and love. And so I think that regardless, if the story has truth or to it in terms of what's actually possible, the themes in those stories are so important, especially to young people, as they look through those, windows, as they approach the sliding glass door of, who do they want to be, and how are they coming to be themselves, and what experiences do they identify with? And I think that just helps people blossom into wonderful, unique individuals that brighten our communities, that strengthen our communities, and that really provide unique perspectives to folks that they might not be, typically able to relate to on certain levels or, in certain ways. So that's a wonderful quote.
Exactly. And I think it's also the idea that young readers are going to become young adults, and they're going to go out into a workforce that is, by definition, diverse. And in order to survive in that workplace, you have to be able to understand the diversity that's all around you. So tell me about Project Open Books.
Yeah, so what do we do? It's always the famous question, because we have been able to reach a lot of different communities in different ways. And what I mean by that is, to back up and to provide some context, Project Open Books is a nonprofit organization. We, through grassroots fundraising and through some donations from small businesses, we've been able to raise money to then use those funds to purchase inclusive LGBTQIA+ books to provide to readers at no cost. It started back technically in June of 2020, as we were really first launching the idea to a close network of friends and relatives and colleagues, and we became official in November of 2020. So we're coming up, it's actually the 2-year anniversary month.
Oh, so this is, I guess, inadvertently a positive outcome of COVID, right? COVID and the first wave of lockdowns and quarantines starts in March of 2020, and your group starts up a couple of months later.
Yep, exactly. And, there's a backstory that we could probably get into as we dive, deeper into this conversation about the why. But, at a time when people were being, kept at home, people were uncomfortable with, in some places, uncomfortable going to, perhaps it was the public library, or maybe it was just to Target, or perhaps it was to Barnes and Noble. I mean, there were barriers that year that kept a lot of us home, and that really limited ultimately what people had access to is it really came down to, okay, well, what's streaming on Netflix this week,
Right.
and what books can I dust off from my bookshelf that I've probably read a few times at this point. I think we are a virtual organization. We're a virtual, essentially free library. We've been able to support readers in over 35 US states, and we've even dabbled with folks in territories in Canada. And we've been able to bring books to their home. We've been able to send books to classrooms, to community centers. We've sent books to counselors and different doctor offices to have available. And so while access it looks different now that we're a couple years into the new normal, as we continue to manage and deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. I think that the really beautiful thing for Project Open Books that came out was we were starting to reach folks at a time where their access looked different. And from that, we've been able to really grow and expand our reach through, what we do on social media, how we talk and communicate with our donors, and ultimately through the power of word of mouth from people we've supported in the past. And so our collaborations and the way we support people looks a little bit different now in November of 2020 than it might have when we first started. But we're certainly, grateful for some of the time we did spend at home. So we're ultimately able to bring resources home to folks all over.
Now, Josh, when you say bring the resources home, do you mean that you're dealing with individual people who request books from you, or is your group mostly dealing, well, business to business is the wrong way to phrase it, but with groups?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I said before, we are completely on the web. So we don't have a physical location, but that really does give us some great flexibility to work with people from all over. Our content focus is we have three different buckets, but we focus typically on on young adults and on children. So our first big bucket of books that we like to promote and to share with folks upon request is our children's picture books. So those are really geared towards ages, as 0 to about 8 years old. And then we bleed into those middle grade years, ages about 9 to 13, before jumping into our young adult novel selection for those between the ages of 14 to about 18. I still read young adult, and I'm 26, so certainly there's no age limit.
Oh, me too. Me too. Guilty as charged. Even at age 60, I still read queer-themed YA novels. I think maybe I'm trying to make up for the lack of resources from when I was a kid, but definitely.
Exactly. There's something so comforting about some of those stories. But to answer your question, so we have about 100 and just over 120 titles on our website that have come as recommendations, that have come as books that we've read that we would like to have on our list, or from those who are excited about a story and they'd love to see it up for other readers to find. And ultimately, a person can come to our website, can browse the selection, and then they fill out just a really simple request form where it says, what's your name? What book are you interested in reading? And where can we mail that to? We do offer discreet packaging because we recognize that sometimes, a person might be at a different point in their journey. Maybe they're exploring a different gender identity, or maybe they're not yet ready to come out as any one of the identities. In my experience, in my case, I sat on coming out as being gay for probably a few years. And so everyone's at a different point in their journey. And so we offer the ability to do discrete packaging to kind of protect that person's journey and where they might be at in it. So that's when we work with individual people. So essentially we ask for very limited information. We send the book, no questions asked at no cost. But there is a whole other side of the piece, of the business where we work with educators, with school librarians, with counselors, in more of a group setting, to your point. And so just yesterday, we were able to drop off 15 copies of a middle grade story to a teacher. It's a classroom set. Unfortunately, she didn't have room in her budget to purchase this book that she was really eager about. And so we were able to provide her with the 15 copies And so in that way, we're working more on a group level than on an individual basis. And we continue to support teachers and educators and librarians as one of our topmost priorities, knowing that in many places, there isn't always budget left over to purchase a book that includes a story of a marginalized group, or maybe it's a little bit too political for their school to purchase on the behalf of the students. And so we're really proud to be able to kind of step in to fill that gap in places where the budget doesn't allow, or maybe it's unfortunately a political issue.
Well, I want to come back to the political issue later, but for now, you alluded to your journey. How did you come to the decision to start Project Open Books? Why is this important to you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I'm going to try to sum it up quickly because I feel like when I tell stories, I go, well, it all started back in 2006. And so when right as we were leading into 2020, I was feeling really motivated to find a way to kind of give back to and support the queer community because, so often we say, and myself included, that things get better, or, oh, it gets better to folks who might be in a time that's a time of struggle, a time of adversity. I think that that's important. It shows that so many people have made it through the fog, to reach that finish line where they feel comfortable and confident, saying that things do get better. But I had a moment where I was like, this is just not enough. It's just not enough to tell folks, especially with the way we're bombarded and attacked in the media and from certain leaders in our space. It's just not enough to say it gets better. It almost feels like that's just like a cop-out. And so I'm having this like moment of reflection. And by all means, I do not think that it is a cop-out, but that was ultimately kind of my train of thought, the process that I was going through that ultimately led me to wanting to do something to give back to the community.
Right.
That helped me get to be where I'm at. So jumping back in time, it was, in my high school days, I grew up in a semi-small town. I say semi because I've met people who've come from much smaller towns. So my high school had about 500 people in it total. I call it small, but I have friends, my partner, people have gone to school with much less people. So I grew up in a semi-small town. I was pretty involved, and I had a lot of really wonderful friends with theater, with athletics, with student government. And although I had a really great network of people, everyone around me was very, at the time at least, acted and presented as and had traditions that all rooted in very heteronormative culture. Mm-hmm. And so I felt, as I was coming to terms with that I might be different and what that means, and that I might be attracted to guys and men, and what that means for me as moving forward, I felt like I was just so at a loss for, well, what comes next? Like, how could I possibly be gay and be on the varsity soccer team? How could I be gay and have kids? I want to be a teacher, but I don't know any gay teachers. And so there was just like so much fog in how I saw my future with the identity at the time that I was battling with. And I mean, all of those things I look at now and I'm like, you could have any identity within the community and literally do anything you want to do. Like it's not a barrier, but not having exposure really made me think that this was just going to have to be it. Like I was just going to have to settle in all aspects of my life because I was gay. So this was about freshman year through the end of sophomore year. So those first 2 years of high school where you're really, if anyone's listening and you're in those years, totally enjoy them and make the most of them. But if you feel cringy, I think it's pretty much
yeah, you're right. There's just no way around that. The beginning of high school is it's awful.
See, that's why I'm constantly in a battle with myself over those lines, because it's so easy to say, but it's better with action. It complements better with action.
Yes.
And so getting back to those couple of years, really when I was about 16 years old, and I had just gotten a job. I was scooping ice cream at a local ice cream shop. I had a debit card with my own money, and I had access to a very old used Subaru Forester that I loved. Her name was Sue the Sube, and we had many, many great days. I digress about the car, but what I would start to do is I would order books online, to be picked up in store at Barnes and Noble, just
Hmm.
like 20 minutes away from my house. And I was picking books that had, a main character who identified as a young gay man.
And you were looking more at fiction, looking at depictions of people who might feel like you, as opposed to nonfiction, histories, memoir, so on and
Yes.
so
So
forth.
actually, I was very much running down the road of fiction. I loved, a young adult coming of age story, rom-com. There was this one book in particular, one of the very first books that I did read. It was called Out of Pocket. It's a story of a young star. I mean, this story has been told probably many, many times, but just in a different way. This was like a star high school football player who is very popular at school. He has all of these like offer letters to go play collegiately at D1, but he's gay and he's hiding it. And then
Mm.
he ultimately, this is a spoiler alert, but I'm not going to go much further. He gets outed, if I'm recalling correctly, by his school newspaper. And the whole story is about being publicly outed and what that's like,
Yeah.
but also, I mean, what does this mean for their their scholarship opportunities, and what does that mean for their time, in the locker room? And I mean, there's so much like baggage that people inflict.
And you have to deal with reevaluating your friend groups because of support or lack of support, and you parental acceptance or lack of acceptance, and all of those things that queer kids have
It
to
was a
deal with.
really, I felt I was not a star football player, and I did not play any sport in college. I had no scholarship opportunities for that, but there were a lot of themes in that book that when I read it, I was like, wow, this feels like me. There's themes in this book, there's experiences in this book that I can connect to. And this is like the first time that I feel like I'm actually connecting to something
Yeah.
and that I feel seen. And so I did that quite a bit. I'd order books online, go to Barnes and Noble. I did not want to check them out of my school library. I couldn't even tell you at the time if they existed. It wasn't even an option because I didn't want anyone to see me at school with a book with gay themes, if you will.
Right.
And I had access. I was lucky. I had a car. I was privileged enough to have disposable income at the time to spend on these books. And so through all of that, it tremendously helped me kind of work through the thoughts and feelings I was having. It didn't make me feel isolated. I felt empowered. I felt seen from those characters and in those pages. And so when I was thinking about how can I give back to my community, what were some things that helped me when I felt like it was just me having to get through it? I wasn't ready to loop in my close friends. I wasn't ready to have conversations with my family. It ultimately came from reading. And I recognized that you might not have disposable income to go spend on a brand new book. You might not be comfortable going into your public library or your school library to check out certain material. So even if you live in a space where you have access available, you might not yet be ready to accept that access on that level because of the barriers that we have in our society in our day to day with being a member of the queer community. So Project Open Books birthed from that idea that we can act as that source for folks to provide them access, and it could be private access to books and stories that they have interest in reading, that they feel empowered by, and that gives them a sense of community and hope, without money being an issue, without physically going to get the book somewhere being an issue. And so that's ultimately the long story of kind of how we.
That's exactly the word, empowerment. And it brings me back to the Dr. Bishop quote: if opposition can deny queer teens access to those mirrors and those windows, then we can't expect that they're going to become educated, well rounded, full citizens in this society. As a former high school librarian, I know that very often we would need to stock multiple copies of queer themed books for two reasons. One being vandalism from kids who don't think they should be there, but also because of exactly what you were describing, that some teens are not yet at a point of self acceptance. They are at a point where if they were seen checking out a queer themed book, they would feel vulnerable. And so a librarian very often needs more than one copy of a book with the understanding that one or two of them might go missing. Because if I'm a kid and I'm feeling that vulnerable, and I think that this book might have the answers I need, I'm taking it. Have you run across that with Project Open Books?
So I haven't heard directly that books have been taken and not returned to more than some other titles, but I haven't explicitly asked those questions. So I would be really curious to inquire with my librarian connections that we've worked with if they've had similar experiences. But what I have heard from different librarians and educators within certain schools is that, of course, there's been, and rightfully so, I mean, there's been a lot of attention on diversifying libraries across the country, both, north, south, east, west. I mean, it really is remarkable. Of course, it's been faced with opposition as well.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard from a lot of librarians that in the process of diversifying the content that they make available to their students and young people, that the diverse lens is very inclusive to a lot of different marginalized groups,
Yes.
which is so important, and one's not more important than the other. I have heard from people that the strong focus has been on stories that feature religious and race diversity, and that the LGBTQ plus community sometimes falls off the short list of books that end up making it for an array of reasons.
Yeah.
And so where I've been able to facilitate collaborations, and my team has been able to facilitate collaborations with different librarians in particular, it typically is because they said, we're getting X amount of books this season with a diverse lens, but only very small percentage was actually approved for this community, and we're looking for additional resources so we can, so we don't just stop here and accept that we only were able to take in 10 new queer titles. We want to get that number up to 20. Can you help?
At the high school where I worked, we had a subscription to something called the Junior Library Guild, where depending on your budget, you got a box once a month with a certain number of new books in it. And you picked from different categories depending on how you wanted to be building your catalog. So, history, realistic fiction, fantasy, biography, but also format. I'm a big fan of graphic novels, so I usually got one or two of those in a box. Are you looking for fiction versus nonfiction? But all YA level books. Josh, one of the things I was wondering about, though, is that in this, well, it's not really a post-COVID world, but COVID has definitely shifted into a new gear. What are you doing in terms of in-person work? Do you work with groups and libraries and classes and that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we are a tiny volunteer-based team. So sometimes I certainly think we could be doing more, not to discredit what we have been doing, just due to our resources and our day-to-day normal, less fun 8 to 5 jobs. What we have done, and what has evolved over the years, is we're trying to take it a little bit another step further than only supplying the book. We recognize that is like the most important transaction that we collaborate with different teachers and students. But from a school perspective, we've been able to facilitate a couple virtual author meet and greets now that the students are back in the classroom and they're having these conversations in person. There were two really fun ones in particular. The first one that we collaborated on was we were working with a school out in Michigan, and it was to kick off June Pride Month. This past year. We were able to provide the students with the book Pride, the story of Harvey Milk and the Rainbow Flag. It's a great book. And we sent that over. It was a fifth grade classroom. The educator did some in-classroom instruction and some activities. And then at the end of that, Rob actually came virtually into the classroom and had a conversation with them about the book and the story writing process and about, who we worked with on the illustrations. And that was super special. So we were really proud to facilitate that, especially for a fifth grade classroom in Michigan. Another one that we worked on was with a Gay Straight Alliance, a GSA group in Hamden, Connecticut. They had reached out. They were really wanted to have a book club where they all read the same book. They picked the book and they would all read it. And the club didn't have the resources to purchase 20 copies of a book. And so we were able to purchase 20 copies of the Henna Wars for them. They were beautiful books, all hardcover. We did a personal drop-off, which is nice because we typically mail books everywhere. But because we're based in Connecticut, we were able to make the actual drop-off, which was really exciting. And it was much more exciting than going to the post office.
My dad was a letter carrier, and we were not allowed to say bad things about the post office in my house growing up. So, yay, post office, we love you.
We love the post office. We have a great one near where we're located that has wonderful hours and great staff. So, shout out to the post office. But the in-person drop-off was just a notch more exciting because it was different than what we're used to. And so, we were able to also connect the author of the Henna Wars with the group as well. After they read it. So they took like 3 months to read the book together. They would meet weekly in their club and talk about it. And then at the end, they were able to virtually meet the author. So while we're not necessarily doing a lot of like physical in-person visits with schools and such, we've been very proud to be able to provide books and then to be able to connect those readers with the author of the book that they just read.
You mentioned legislative opposition. And I want to go back to that for a second. Librarians, both school librarians and public librarians, are looking to create safe, inclusive spaces for all their patrons. And legislative opposition to that has been garnering a lot of media attention lately, and rightly so. The ALA, the American Library Association, lists that 5 of their top 10 most frequently banned or objected to books are queer themed. An article from the Texas Tribune from September of this year said, and I don't think they were bragging, but they cited that Texas had the most banned books of any state in the nation with 801. The closest to that was Florida with 566 and Pennsylvania with 457. And if you've taken a look at the list that Representative Matt Krause put out of 850 books he wanted banned from public libraries and school libraries, very clearly they were all either targeting books that treated blacks or queer people sympathetically. For queer youth, overwhelmingly, the library is their primary point of access for the sorts of books that you were talking about that you used to order from Barnes & Noble. So to what extent has this sort of legislative pushback affected Project Open Books?
So I am knocking on wood. You might even hear it. We at Project Open Books have not run into any issues directly where we're being targeted for providing books to people. But we certainly, we have our guard up, if you will, because one of the things that we do is we tag all of our books. And so if somebody comes across our book, they see that it says free LGBTQ plus books at projectopenbooks.com. And so we find that, to be something super important because we want to make sure that as these books, especially in shared spaces, are passed down reader after reader, that it doesn't have to end when they turn that last page and close the book, that they're able to, find other stories and where they can go to find them. But what I will say about what's going on, and we've certainly seen a significant uptick in the last handful of years targeting especially, queer young people, gender nonconforming people, trans folks. I mean, the list goes on, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
It is devastating. And I have had conversations before with people during some live presentations where we're talking about how we support educators, specifically, grades K through 5. That seems to be a really hot topic, especially in places like Florida. I've encouraged them to read one of the books that they'd like banned, because so often the folks who are quite loud about this issue actually haven't taken the time to read the stories. And some of the most beautifully illustrated, beautifully told stories for, a 8-year-old in elementary school has either queer themes or queer characters. And it is done in such a beautiful way and in a kind way, in a place of love. And, I just, it's so hard for me to understand the strong disdain or distaste to some of these books because they're so lovely. And I'm very biased, I know that, and I'm a very progressive, and I would classify myself as a liberal. But when I strip it down and I look at it for face value, I encourage folks, if there's any book that might make them uncomfortable, it might be because they might learn something. And I think we all should take time in our day-to-day to acknowledge certain lived experiences from people and empower them, and just, take it back, take things from it, learn from it, and, uplift your neighbors and support your community and the people that live there.
Yeah, and I think the objection is simply acknowledging that we exist. If the people objecting were to take the time to actually read the book, most of the times, especially at the younger reader age, the elementary school books, you would find that the same values are espoused: family and love and support and friendship and all the things that really matter in the world, as opposed to just slapping a label on it. Oh, this book has lesbians in it. Oh, this book has gender identity as a theme. I remember the first time I read Kyle Lukoff's Max series. I think there are 3 books in it, and his characters, even it's such a simple illustrated child's book on one hand, but the characters are multifaceted and it has so much heart. And I remember I being grateful when I read one of them that I was at home doing it, because I started to tear up, and my thought was, where the hell was this when I was a kid? And I mean, I know the answer to that, but it's as simple as this, that a 20-page children's book that acknowledged someone like me would have changed my life. That's how high the stakes are in this.
I do want to say, what are some ways that we are kind of navigating these choppy waters? And so while personally I shared my feelings about how I feel about the situation as a whole. Well, there are unfortunately some situations, like in a place like Florida, where we actually are a little bit restricted and teachers are timid or afraid or not permitted to have certain books within their classroom. So in Florida in particular, we've actually been able to work with a couple of different youth organizations or community centers. And so down in Naples, Florida, we were able to attend their local Pride event. We have some board members and volunteers within the state of Florida who went and they handed out over $300 in books within that community and bypassed any sort of school or any sort of rule that might be in place. So that was one thing that we did there. We also worked with their local Pride Center. They didn't have a whole lot of books for young people, both young adult, middle grade, children. So we made a 15 book donation across those age groups to the LGBTQ plus center, the Naples Pride Center, so that those books would be available within their community. We've been able to support a Pride Center also in Orlando, and then we did a really fun collaboration this past summer with Camp Out in Tampa. It's a queer summer camp, and we were able to make also I think it was a 10-book donation to have available to young people as they pass through their summer camp. So while the way that we've worked with people traditionally tends to be in a school setting, there's some places where we've seen either a decline in requests or maybe a lack of interest. And we know that there's interest there, but there's political factors that are preventing some of it. So we're trying to be creative in places like Florida. Well, how do we still get books into these communities? And we're approaching it more of like a grassroots way, having conversations with our connections down in those communities to say, how can we support your community if it's not by supporting them and the young people in school? Like, what are some of the other footprints that we can align with in those communities?
And I want to make very clear to the listeners what you're saying, that everything you're doing with Project Open Books is above board. There is no subversive agenda. You are just filling requests from either individuals or groups within a community. They express their needs to you, and then you act to help by sending them books for free. And as you've described, this is all level appropriate, as defined not by you, but by the individual or the group. They come to you and say, here's what we need. So in anticipating arguments against this, you are not trying to superimpose some sort of liberal, progressive agenda.
Yes, you're spot on. So we are like I said before, we are a nonprofit. We are an apolitical organization. We are taking titles that exist and we're bringing them to readers who express interest. And so when people reach out because they have a need, whether it's a financial need, a content need, a personal interest need, we're happy. It's our pleasure to be able to bridge the gap, to be able to provide them with the books that they might not otherwise have access to. There's so many factors that go into it, but we have authors spending their life writing these wonderful stories for all ages, and we want to show those authors that their work is important, and we're happy to purchase those books on the behalf of our requestees. So yeah, all we do, we wait for people to learn about us through word of mouth, through how we position ourselves on social media and on our website. And once those requests have been made, we're happy to facilitate.
And how can people get in touch with you if they want to either make a request or if they want to support Project Open Books?
We're very grateful to any and all who choose to support us. We are completely grassroots funded. So we use our money, like I said, majority is from individual donors. We have some small business support here and there, but it's our small individual donors that really help us keep going, should I say, to be able to provide books to young readers. And I just want to throw out some quick numbers. I typically do this when I introduce POB, Project Open Books. But over the last 2 years, we've been able to send out over $18,000 in books to readers across 35 states. And we're really proud of that. We have a really small team, and we have a beautiful list of donors from all over the place who really help make that possible. That's equivalent to just about, $18,000 in books donated, which is equivalent to about 1,300 books. So we've hand packaged 1,300 books. We've brought them shout out to the post office as we did before, and we've sent those out to readers, and like I said, in over 35 states. So we're just so proud of those numbers, and we couldn't do it without the support of individual donors. And so if you go to our website, projectopenbooks.com, there's a contribute, tab that you can click on that really kind of breaks down the different ways to support us. We have an Amazon book wish list. If you're maybe more inclined to make a book donation, a physical book donation, you can do so. We also have an online donation form. You could become a monthly supporter. You can make a donation over PayPal or Venmo. And we also are on Amazon Smile. And so for those of you who aren't familiar, Amazon has a charitable leg called Amazon Smile where you can select a charity. So then all of your verified purchases, all of the purchases that qualify for this, I think it's 0.05% of your purchase gets donated to a charity of your choice. So if you're on Amazon and you don't have a charity, consider supporting Project Open Books. It's a completely free way to support us through your purchases. We get quarterly checks from them. So it really is, it's quite nice. Every quarter we get a check in from Amazon and a couple $100 comes in, and that costs really nobody anything. It just all comes from, just when you're shopping, just making most purchases are eligible to contribute towards Amazon Smile. I haven't run into anything that's not, but they always add a disclaimer. Anyways, if you have another charity in mind, look them up on there. I think if you're on Amazon and you don't have a charity selected, I highly encourage you to do so. Find a cause that's close to your heart. It costs you nothing, and corporations like Amazon should be sending money, towards nonprofit. But yeah, visit the website, and if you have any questions or you have ideas on how maybe you could help support us, feel free to reach out. There's contact forms all over, and those go directly to me. So I'm happy to have a conversation.
And if you're a librarian or an advisor in a school to a GSA or a book club, reach out. Check out the website and get in touch with Josh and see what POB can do for you. And once you do, spread the love on social media. Let folks know about the good work that's being done here. Josh, this has been wonderful, and I'm very grateful for your time. Is there anything else that we should talk about before we close this out?
This has been such a lovely slice of time, and I'm so grateful for you, Claire, for bringing me on to talk about Project Open Books and the work that we're doing. I mean, like I said, we're a small but mighty machine, and I would encourage people who feel like there's something that they want to do, or they have this desire, this inkling to want to take action, to just really look inward and where is that coming from? What's encouraging you? What's motivating you to have those thoughts to want to, try to make a difference within your own community or outside of your community? And think about those past experiences. Think about what has brought you, here today, both in your own experiences, but in those thoughts as well. And, take action on it. I just think that there's so much going on in the world, and we're inundated in thoughts and opinions and in media consumption, and find your little slice of the pie and do whatever you feel is right. And at the end of the day, we're all doing our best out here. And if we can all just contribute a little bit, I think we're going to make it better for folks, for the next generation, or for our neighbors.
Thanks again to Josh Lambert for joining me for this conversation. If you have a job where collaborating with Project Open Books might be beneficial to you, reach out. And if you are in a position to support them, they are a more than worthy charitable cause. So please, again, get in touch and help out in any way you can. When you do, mention Transqat. A couple of technical notes. As I re-listened to the episode, I realized that I was a lot more congested than I thought I was. So I apologize for the sniffles and the labored breathing. Also, one of my cats knows that dinner time is at 4. And so at about 2, when I started talking to Josh, he positioned himself right next to me, started vigorously head rubbing the laptop, and then proceeded to purr through the entire interview as a sign to me that I could stop what I was doing and go feed him if I wanted. And as I listen back to the podcast, it sounds at times as if I have fallen asleep and started snoring as Josh was talking. That is not the case. Coming up on Transqat the podcast, next episode will be with Lucas Newman, a young trans man from Houston, Texas. In December, I'm very excited to be talking to Stefan Simonovich from Transforward Healthcare in New Haven, Connecticut. So all of that and more coming up. Please stay tuned. Thank you for listening. Let's talk soon. I'm Claire McCarthy, and this is Transqat.
This is Sadie McCarthy. I'm Claire's niece. Transqat is a production of Transqat Enterprises, LLC. Copyright 2022, all rights reserved. Join us on the web at transqat.com. That's TRANSQAT.com. There, you'll find links to Transqat, the blog, writing projects, speaking engagements, and more. You can also meet the team who thought spelling cat with a Q was a good idea. Follow Transqat on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Leave us a comment on whatever platform you use to stream this podcast. Just remember to be kind. She has enough self-esteem problems already. To reach Claire with a question or a suggestion for an upcoming episode, just use the contact page at the website or email her directly at crmtranscat@gmail.com. Thanks for listening.